Hey y'all, and welcome back to my channel. In this tutorial we're going to be making this beautiful winter scene tumbler. It is a lot simpler than it looks. I know y'all are all like, please do not come at me with another printable vinyl tutorial, but here I am again. I promise this one is a lot easier than the floral designs, and I will walk you through every step. So without further ado, let's get started. The paint colors I will be using is French Blue, Coastal Sage, and White, all from Rust-Oleum. And this is just going to be an easy ombre. So many times I have done tutorials and haven't shown you guys how I spray paint my cup. And you can see the weather wasn't very favorable. The wind was blowing my paint everywhere. But I was able to get a nice ombre and get it on camera for you guys. So I hope that this helps. And as you can see, I'm holding my paint cans pretty far back, especially when I go into those last few coats. I do go back and forth between my paints quite a few times just so I can get the perfect ombre. And these three colors blend really well. So it was much easier on this one, but at least you will have an idea of how I do spray them. The key is just to hold your can far back and not really go crazy with it. Take your time and build that nice ombre up. I have a 24 plump from the Steel Magnolia tumbler and my A Little Extra ink epoxy. These are two of my all-time favorite products, including the PDB glitter that I will be using. These products simply cannot be beat. They have upped my tumbler game. I have raised my prices, and all of my customers cannot get over the sparkle, the shine, and how well these cups hold their ice and hold their drink, the warmth of their drinks. So I used about 1 milliliter of A Little Extra ink epoxy, and I stretched that over the cup as much as possible and then went over with my glove and just tapped all around the cup. That will get rid of any of those lines or ripples. So instead of letting my cup sit, I can go immediately into applying my glitter. As much as I would like to take credit for the ombre on this cup, the only thing I did was the spray paint. And we took Astrid from PDB, which is absolutely stunning, and put it over the entire cup. And it looks like, you know, we did some pretty awesome ombre by hand. We're just gonna let that rip over the entire cup and make sure that we have a really good even coverage. And I will tap off the excess glitter with my scissors. And then I'm gonna show you a little trick to get really good epoxy coverage on that first coat. I just take a sheet of notebook paper, lay my cup down on it sideways. Now, a lot of people use parchment paper for this. But this is just a 0.015 cut glitter. So you wouldn't necessarily have to do this, but I have found if I pat this glitter down, I only need 1 coat of A Little Extra epoxy. That epoxy has pretty amazing coverage, so it definitely will vary the epoxy that you use and the viscosity of it. I'm just all for getting the best coverage possible on those first coats so we can move directly into decals after that cures. As I said earlier, this is a 24-ounce plump from the Steel Magnolia, and I'm using about 20 to 25 milliliters of A Little Extra epoxy to coat my cup. Then I would just run a torch over it to get rid of any micro bubbles and allow that to cure for about 6 to 8 hours before I am applying decals. Alright, so let's get this decal cut. As you see, I have opened up my Cricut program and my existing project. I'm going to show you how I build the image up at the top. The bottom one is just an alternative image if you don't want to cut the deer and the antlers out, so you can definitely compose that one if you like. I measured the circumference of the tumbler, and that is 9.75 inches, and that is actually the largest that you can do a print to cut feature. But what we are going to want is for that image to overlap. So we're going to have to cut it bigger than the 9.75. And that is why the little house and tree is kind of by itself, so I can easily overlap that when I cut these two separately. All right, so I'm going to re-add these images so I can show you exactly how I composed that whole thing. I got these files from Etsy, and as always, all of my links will be in the description so you can grab them as well. I have uploaded them to my computer, or downloaded them to my computer and uploaded them to the Cricut program. And we are just going to go through resizing them and how I attach these pictures so they will cut properly. Now these can be different dimensions than what I have here. I'm just using that 9.75 as a base. So you can make your trees, your deer, your houses, whatever, larger or smaller than what I have. I will tell you that the antlers on the deer are really, really hard to cut. So with that being said, you don't want to go too much smaller than what I do have. If you want to use the exact sizes and dimensions, I do click on them periodically, so you can screenshot and zoom in, save that for your records if you want to do the same exact sizes that I have. If not, just stay within that 9.75, that boundary, so that your program will cut. And of course, there are lots of other little Christmas scenes and like forestry. There's so many options on Etsy, it's unreal, and it took me forever to actually pick these out. So you don't have to use this exact design. Find something that may suit you better or may be a little simpler to cut. What I look for in my print to cut images is something that does not have a lot of intricate details and negative space. Lots of negative space means more for your Cricut to cut out, or your Silhouette, whichever program you are using, and that takes a lot of time and it is more to clean up. So what I'm doing here with these trees, and again, these are a little difficult to cut because the limbs are so slim, but it gives me a boundary or a guide for the second image that I will be overlaying once I have these cut out. And you'll see whenever I apply this decal to the cup that the little house that is separate from this main large image is going to fit perfectly between those two trees. And once I have my image composed completely, I'm going to highlight that area and flatten the image. This is going to attach them all together, and the Cricut will cut them as one image instead of individually. Now, I did go outside the boundaries a little bit on this one, so I just scrapped it and went back to my original. The image has to be 9.75 by 6.25, and I was about a 1/4 inch over. I could have just adjusted the trees, pulled them back a little bit, and made the size work, but I just went back to my old image. And I'm making 4 of these tumblers at one time, so for some reason I duplicated this times 4, and without thinking, I could have just selected to print 4 of them from the print screen and then just recut. I don't know what I was thinking. I make things more difficult sometimes. Anyway, moving on. So I created a shape, and I'm going to put that to the dimensions of 6.25 by 9.75 so that I can align these images on my paper the way that I would like for them to be, rather than the program just automatically populating it for me and wasting paper. Once I have those within the frame of my shape, I will highlight them and attach. Delete everything else, because at this point I realized that I had just made way too many images. And then select Make It. And once that comes over to your print screen, you're going to want to send that to printer and make sure that that little green toggle button is on so that your bleed is on. This will extend the image just slightly so that whenever the program cuts it, if it does go outside of the image boundaries just a little bit, it's not going to reflect that in your final image. And you're not going to have any of that white border. And once that is printed, you're just going to align that on your Cricut mat and hit the go button. I always use the regular vinyl setting. I don't use any kind of custom or washi tape that a lot of people have mentioned using. But make sure your blade is new. I cut a ton of printable vinyl, as you already know. So when I went to cut this, I completely forgot to replace my blade, and it pretty much butchered the antlers on the deer. So make sure that you have a fairly new blade. If you have any trouble with it cutting properly, that is very likely your problem. Also, the printable vinyl that I have used in all of my tutorials is my absolute favorite and has been the best result that I have gotten all across the board. And I have tried very many because I use it a lot. So definitely purchase this vinyl, or at least I encourage you to, or let me know if you have one that works even better. I would love to try it as well. We're just going to pull all the excess off around the image, and I would typically do the hinge method. Since this is such a large image, I don't want to trust myself just placing it on straight, but with the new blade sometimes it does cut through the paper. And I'm gonna pull this off, and I just took a piece of my transfer tape, pulled the transfer tape off, and we're just gonna use the backing to that to have a really clean slate to use for this hinge method. Make sure that you're not trying to get ahead of yourself and that you're moving really slow pulling this off, because you do not want to mess any of the trees or the antlers up that are really small designs that can pull apart really easily. And I'm going to place this as straight as I can on my transfer tape backing and trim off the edge of it so we can apply this using the hinge method. Now, I've already done one of these, so I want all of them to match. I'm just going to line this up. I'll press the corner of the tree down and then just wrap the image all the way around the cup, making sure that it is straight before I begin removing the backing. And once I have that in place, I'm going to secure the exposed edge of my decal, and then just sit this down and pull the backing off as I am pressing the image down to the cup. You will have to go really slow. I'm going to speed this up, but I did really take my time on this. I always do with my printable vinyl. It's so fragile and it is a little testy, so I always want to get it right the first time so I don't have to deal with it again. And once that is complete, then we'll move on and apply our second decal in between those trees, as I have mentioned before. Now, of course, if you're more comfortable, you can do the hinge method on this as well. Since it's such a small image, I just placed that on there. Knowing that I had gotten my first image straight, I can base that off of that tree and I'm good to go. Once you have all of your decals on, make sure that they are pressed down great. You do not want any of this to lift whenever you're doing your epoxy, because if you do go back in and not realize it and sand the cup, you can ruin the vinyl underneath, thus ruining the whole design and having to start over. I have my Winter Wonderland decal. I made this image myself, so this will be available in the file section of the Brittany Barnes Boutique epoxy group. I just made a 0.035 offset so that it shows the silver on the back and really makes the white decal or wording stand out. If you're using a really sticky transfer tape, you're going to want to trim that so that it does not touch your printable vinyl. Since the printable vinyl is more like paper on the top, whenever you put a piece of tape on paper and you pull it off, it'll remove any like writing or sort of like the top layer. So you don't want that to touch your printable vinyl. It will remove some of the coloring or some of the design off of it whenever you remove the tape. If you're more comfortable, you can apply a layer of epoxy and then do your decaling, but I want as little top layers as possible. Moving right along to our snow, the first tumbler I made like this, I actually put the acrylic paint on the paintbrush and flicked it on because I had a layer of epoxy in between, and it was like a last minute, hey, this would be a cool effect decision. So like I said, I want to eliminate as many of those top coats as possible. So we're gonna go in with, this is actually a kid's paintbrush with the with the top cut off. It just works really good for dabbing the paint on. But that's all I'm doing. I'm just dipping it in the paint and creating little dots to look like snow. And don't forget to go over your vinyl as well with your snow, because it should definitely be falling in front of your images as well. And once you have finished that, we're going to coat this at least 3 times with Rust-Oleum matte clear coat. We don't want any errors after all of this work, so seal it in. It's better to seal than be sorry. That's what I say. And once that is dry, I'm going to go straight in with my a little extra ink epoxy. I'm not using a typical coat of epoxy. These are 24 plumps from the Steel Magnolia, and I'm probably using about 15 milliliters of epoxy just to get coverage, just to basically seal everything in so we can do our snow effect at the bottom. And for that, I'm using Snow from PDB. I mixed a scoop of that into my epoxy, and I'm just going to apply that with my popsicle stick. And the reason that we do not want so much on our initial coat is so there's not so much movement in this. I don't want it to come up on my images. I kind of want it to stay where it's at. And I'm basically just painting that on with the popsicle stick and then rubbing through it in a zigzag motion to create the effect of snow. And once I am finished with that, I'm just going to briefly run over with my torch to pop any micro bubbles, allow this to cure, and then at that point I will sand the top and bottom rim really well to get rid of any lumps or bumps, and then do my final coat on top of that. And we're all done. So I know this was probably my longest tutorial yet, but there have been tons of questions about printable vinyl, and I always try to cover as many of those as possible when I do my tutorials. The result from this cup is just spectacular, and I personally think that it looks like so much more work went into this than actually did. As always, the links to everything that I used on this tumbler will be in the description below, as well as some exclusive discounts. So go check those out and use those codes if you want to save some change. And if you're not already part of the Brittany Barnes Boutique Epoxy Tumbler Art Group, check the links below and join in with us. I would love to see all of your creations, whether they follow my tutorials or not. I'm always posting exclusive discounts in there as well as some giveaways. We actually have one going on right now. So don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Hit the little bell to be notified anytime a new tutorial drops. And that's all for today. We'll see you next time. Thanks, guys.